The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello, this is Carl Seidel, The People's View, and today we have the Honorable Ray Chadwick, Chairman of Granite State Taxpayers. Ray, how are you doing? Are you a happy taxpayer now? Are you worried like I am?
Well, I think there's a lot going on that is worrisome. When you think about the issues that have come out of the coronavirus pandemic, some of the things going on in Concord, and the continual delays in reopening the economy. And I think from a standpoint of both the federal economy, the federal tax situation, the federal deficit, and soon to be upon us, the consequences in New Hampshire, there's going to be a lot to worry about over the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. And it's starting tomorrow, I guess, or Wednesday.
Well, I think one of the things that is on table, we've written a couple of basically posts onto our website and emails to our members. By the way, our website is www.granitestatetaxpayers.org, and people can contact us at info@granitestatetaxpayers.org. But we've analyzed a couple of things. We've analyzed some of the original coronavirus stimulus bills that came out of the U.S. House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. We've looked at some of the consequences of the fall off in revenue for the state. And one of the things that's rolling straight towards us is the question of, well, what do you do to bring the economy back? Now, we are a taxpayer group. So one of the things we learned a long time ago, if you want less of something, tax more of it. So if you want more employment, you don't want to be increasing taxes on employers. You want to be reducing it. And part of the problem that we have, and this is a consequence of the deals made in the last budget, is that there were built into the budget some triggers that would roll back some of the reductions in the business enterprise and the business profits taxes. And those have been reduced over the last several years. When the Republicans ran the legislature, they passed bills signed by the governor, Sununu, that reduced those taxes. And the consequence of reducing taxes is that individuals and businesses, they have more money in their pockets, so they can spend it on what they want, which could be new equipment, it could be a new TV, a new whatever.
And basically, that larger than they projected. They have more. Well, reduced the tax rate, and you get more money.
Exactly. And if you're trying to basically to get the economy back into where it was, which before the coronavirus came upon us was in great shape. We had record low unemployment nationally and in New Hampshire. And that was all a consequence of the tax reductions made at the federal level back in 2017 and various reductions in business taxes here in state. Once again, leaving more money in the pockets of the consumers and the businesses so they can invest in what they want. What people do then, and they invest in things. Sometimes it's vacations, it's electronics, you name it. For businesses, it'll be equipment or perhaps training for new employees. Those are the kinds of things you want to continue when you run into economic difficulties. You want to leave incentives that allow people to grow again. And part of our concern is that the people that are today the majority in Concord, in both the House and the Senate, as well as the Executive Council too, are people that are more, how should I say this gracefully, more interested in raising taxes because it seems to me their first instinct seems to be to make sure there's an income stream into the government instead of worrying about how much money is in the hands of the individual taxpayers.
Mm-hmm.
So that as they're working now to bring back the legislature into session, which I gather will be the first day will be on June 11th. But I think one of the issues that is before them now is how to revise the rules to even allow that to happen. And how do you deal with all these bills that were in the session, but they haven't met the deadlines for completion in the House and then transfer to the Senate and vice versa. So I think the first step in this will be a Rules Committee meeting tomorrow. And right now the two parties are at loggerheads over, how to proceed on these kinds of things. So it'll be an interesting day tomorrow. We'll be watching with great interest. But once again, our view is if you want to get the economy rolling again, it would be wrong to start raising taxes just to protect government.
Well, I think that all comes about because of what they added to that legislation last year, where they were saying that the taxes would be increased if it didn't meet a certain projection of income. And of course, with the virus problem, we shut down a lot of companies, so we're not going to meet that minimum that they needed to keep the rate the same or even decrease it. And the Republicans are strongly against it, according to what we heard on TV just on Sunday. And they need 2/3 of the total vote to be able to make a rule change to that legislation.
Right. And that's the issue. This is a built-in, quote, automatic increase that goes along with a certain shortfall in basically revenue to the state. And that was, when it was done, it was envisioned that the idea that somehow, well, I don't know. It didn't, let's put it this way. It wasn't anticipating the circumstances we're in now. So it needs some form of legislative remedy. Otherwise, we're going to wind up with businesses which are struggling already. And the first thing they come back, they actually have to start making payments because this actually, if I got it correctly, rolls back to January. And that's not going to be helpful.
And we have it's essentially a whole quarter of missing income. And
exactly.
Fortunately, earlier when we did have excesses, we put it into the rainy day fund. So we have a little bit of a leeway with that, but it's still not going to be enough to satisfy it. I think what the legislation, besides passing what legislation has already been argued by the committees, they're going to have to have some proposals which cut spending somehow, or the governor is going to have to be able to cut his spending so that we can balance our budget.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And of course, states can't print money like the federal government, so we do have to balance budgets. And we did an analysis, it's probably a month old now, on our website, and we need to be making significant reductions in spending, like starting now, to be able to pull our way out of this revenue shortfall created by the shutdowns of businesses. And I think that leads to the other issue that it's, at least in our opinion, we've watched the coronavirus as it's made its way through the population. We're noting that out of the 1.25 million people in the state, approximately, about 1 million of them are under 60. And that group has had less than 5% of the deaths. The other 250,000 people are the ones over 60 who are having all the deaths. So where that leads me, and I'm over 60. Okay, but that leads me to the conclusion that if you are in the over 60 group, you should be taking precautions. If you're under 60, which means most working age people, it's time to go back to work. Mm-hmm. And we've actually put a couple of posts up on that. And we're in the process of working to exhort the governor to sort of move forward on reopening businesses, reopening restaurants, with certain precautions. I understand the social distancing, got it. But I think people can manage that. So I think it's time to get back to business, get people back out.
It's also time where New Hampshire gets a lot of its income from tourists that are going to be here.
Exactly. And I won't even go into one of the other things. I'll talk a bit about Granite State Taxpayers a bit, but and then circle back to this COVID fiasco. But basically, our job, or our reason for being, is really to inform, educate, motivate New Hampshire taxpayers and influence the legislature on their behalf. And when we do that, we look at a variety of things. We look at state spending. Does it make sense? Is it within the constitutional obligation of the state? We look at taxation rates, taxation sources of income. As mentioned before, if you want less of it, tax more of it. New Hampshire is one of the better states for taxation. But the other issue is regulations. And those are, depending on what they may be, some are reasonable and some can get really out of hand. And we've noted, as this coronavirus situation has rolled forth, that there's been a lot of regulations that have been rolled back. For example, regulations that would require that if you're a doctor from another state, you have to be licensed here or do certain protocols. This is true in EMTs. I used to spend time in the emergency response arena, and that was one of the things there. You would have treaties, multi-state and provincial treaties, allowing EMTs to operate in different jurisdictions in cases of an emergency. So I think part of the only good side, I think, to the coronavirus imbroglio is that it has put a focus on things like regulations. For example, if you've been cutting your own hair, or in my case, my wife has been cutting my own hair, she is not a licensed barber. And that's actually against the law in this state. So there are some things there that don't make a lot of sense. And hopefully, as we come out of this, we'll eventually continue looking at those kinds of things. By the way, some of these regulations are ostensibly to keep us safe in the coronavirus environment. But some states have done some amazing things. For example, Ocean City, New Jersey, opened their beaches, and you were allowed to walk, but not stand. You were allowed to surf, but not to swim. So it leads you to the question, who's writing these things, and how do you make your way out through the waves to surf if you can't swim there? Anyway, that's my little attempt to see some humor in this coronavirus fiasco, which I think will be bedeviling us for quite a while.
No, I agree. We hear a lot of strange stories out there.
I would say. Let me talk a little bit, Carl, about Granite State Taxpayers, because there's a couple of interesting things I'd like to get in front of your viewers. We are actually celebrating our 30th anniversary as the state's, the largest or longest lived state taxpayer group. And the group was founded on March 26, 1990 by the late New Hampshire Senator George Lovejoy and the late Governor Mel Thompson. Mel Thompson, of course, is famous for the phrase, low taxes are the result of low spending. So the organization goes back to that point. But it's interesting, the Articles of Incorporation, 59 other individuals across the state formed this organization. And basically the charter was to advocate for taxpayers. And when you think about it, taxpayers in general don't often, have a big issue. It's that you can find all manner of lobbyists that will advocate for this particular issue or this particular group. But taxpayers in general, they only deal with the government when it comes time to pay the tax bill. So basically what we're doing is we're basically a group of individuals, membership. We have about 500 people on our email list, and we do things like we go up and testify on bills. We write op-eds, we write posts, we write a variety of things, once again, to try to protect the taxpayers from, quote, special interest groups, because the taxpayers are, the final repository of all that the state does. It's got to be paid for by the taxpayers. And we're fortunate to live in a state that has conducted itself, as Mel Thompson said, low taxes resulting from low spending. People often complain about the property taxes. That is the major place people pay money. A lot of that's going locally and going for schools, of course. But interestingly enough, a variety of other states with income taxes and sales taxes also have high property taxes. So again, we think New Hampshire is doing it about right. And while the economy was really running well, we actually had people immigrating into the state for the first time in quite a few years. So our population has been growing, and that's a good thing. People vote with their feet. They come here because they find it an attractive place because of the environment, the economy, the tax system, a whole variety of reasons. But our job, as we see it, is to be, as best we can, the ones that get up in front of the legislature and protect taxpayers from, whatever may be going on. So we spend a lot of time.
A lot of things to watch out for on this legislation, too, because not only are they looking at increasing the business taxes, but they're talking about income tax again. And that, I know, is one big flag that you guys don't want to see fly.
Well, if that happens, that will, I think, almost irrevocably change the character of the state. Because what happens in any state that's had an income tax, or states that said, okay, we have an income tax, let's have a sales tax, and then we'll reduce property taxes. It never happens because the money, once it is raised, it'll get spent. And the way you keep the government small and focused on its obligations is to not give it a lot of money. You give it more money, it'll go find things to do. So we think that's basically our task, is to try and keep that idea of frugal government that lives within its responsibilities. And we're going to see, I'm sure, and especially depending on how the election in November turns out, if indeed we wind up, let's say, with the Democrats in control of the legislature again, they will be, unarguably, they will be looking for revenues to, make up for what we've lost in this past year. If indeed the governor becomes, that seat is occupied by a Democrat, I would suggest we definitely will have an income tax before this next election, the following election. Mm-hmm. And that will be a sea change in this state.
Well, that's the control that they're looking for. They want to control everything. They want to grow the government instead of making it smaller. They haven't determined that the individuals are the ones that can do things much more effectively and economically. It's always the government that has to be in there doing their job of spending our money.
Right. And I think, the way I look at this, because, people tend to describe it, you're being heartless. We need to do this. We need to do that. And no, I'm not. I'm thinking that what's really going on here when somebody says we're going to spend the money, you're actually talking about spending the money that exists within every family. And my family, like every other, we have a certain amount of income, we have a certain amount of expense. If the two don't match well, then we've got to change one or the other, curtail expenses, or find ways to raise more income. In the case of the government, we just want to make sure that they don't just decide, okay, we're going to raise more income, we're going to take it away from individuals and families, and thereby, by taking that money, take away their options, or take away their choices, or take away the opportunity to spend it on things that they find attractive and interesting, like perhaps a vacation, whatever it may be. So those are the kinds of things that we look at. But I should point out, in addition to that, there are a couple other major issues. We look at spending, we look at taxes, we look at regulations. I mentioned those three. There's a couple other things we've gotten into over the years. One, close to almost 9 years ago, we got more into the question of election laws, because we began to realize that the way the laws are set up in the state, which are the result of a series of court decisions and not well-written legislation, they allow some things that are unique in the state. And the one in particular that we've railed against is the idea that residents of other states can vote here. No other state allows this, of course. So there's been we put a lot of effort into that. The legislature, back when the Republicans ran the show, we worked with them. They passed two bills. One, House Bill 1264, requiring one, basically said that if you want to vote here, you have to be a resident. And Senate Bill 3 that said if you want to register to vote, you have to prove you're a resident. Again, the same as any other state. So those have gone on, and the New Hampshire Democrat Party actually brought suit against them, lawsuit on behalf of out-of-state voters, literally. So to give out-of-state voters, or more accurately, out-of-state residents, the opportunity to vote here. We think that's horribly wrong. Part of the reason that representative and Republican government actually exists, the way the founders set it up, is you elect your representatives, they pass laws, you live under them. If you don't like those laws, then you vote for somebody different or advocate for different laws. And that really doesn't work when people can actually come here and vote and don't have to live with the consequences. So in effect, in this state for many years now, you've had two classes of voters: people who can vote here and then go back to Montana or wherever and not have to pay the taxes or deal with the consequences of the regulations. And others, like, say, myself, who am a resident, I vote here, I pay taxes, I register my car, I have a driver's license. So there's been some progress in that area. We've now had the Democrats have dropped their lawsuit against House Bill 1264, the one saying you have to be a resident, after the Supreme Court of New Hampshire twice came back and said, no, that's constitutional. It's certainly constitutional because the way every other state does it. The other bill actually asking people to provide proof when they register to vote, again, like every other state. That went to a superior court in New Hampshire, and they declared it unconstitutional because, and the logic was really amazing. They said, well, we note that people did a lot of work to educate voters about the new law, and the fact that they did a lot of work is an indication that it must have been unduly burdensome, so they declared it unconstitutional. That's going to the Supreme Court. And we've filed briefs on both of these things because, once again, we think New Hampshire voters should actually live in New Hampshire and participate in New Hampshire's life, taxes, political world, etc.
And other laws.
It seems logical, doesn't it? But I think part of, if you look back to the last 2016 election, And we've got the data. Amazingly enough, the Secretary of State actually records this. 6,540 people came in on election day, registered to vote, and for identification, they used an out-of-state driver's license. Now, you don't get a driver's license unless you prove to that state that you're a resident. So, and by the way, these aren't people that just moved here. 491 of them were people that came in and changed the registration on election day from one town in New Hampshire to another town in New Hampshire, and for identification, gave an out-of-state driver's license. So as I say, I tell my friends from other states this, they think I'm nuts. So we're working hard to basically solve that problem.
Well, it sounds like your organization is kind of busy keeping us straight and narrow. Do you have anything else to say on their 30th anniversary as we close?
Yes, we're having a 30th anniversary celebration, and that will be on August 11th at 6:30 at Murphy's Carriage House in Bedford. We're expecting that, we'll all be open by that time. We're sort of betting on that. And our guest speaker will be Grover Norquist, who is the president of Americans for Tax Reform. And he's an individual that is at the forefront of tax reform nationally. Very influential organization. He got involved in this at the behest of Ronald Reagan. So he's seen it all about taxes and various ways to keep taxes low. So there will be more information on that. Actually, there's information on our website, www.granitestates.org. And people will hear more through emails as we go forward. We're going to start selling tickets in another week or two when we make sure that the coronavirus shutdowns will be ending by then.
Okay, well, very good. Thanks for all the information. We appreciate having you on People's View, and I'm sure we'll have you on again before the election when a lot of things will be decided.
I look forward to that. And like I said, check out our website. Anyone wants to get on our email list or be a member, then you can do it right there.
And people who want to get in touch with the Republican Nashua, just go to NashuaGOP.org. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Charles. Good day.
Bye.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.